Well, good morning. Thank you for taking the time for this particular session. I'm going to give some caveats before I begin. This is not going to be a very deep dive into AI. We're not going to discuss the implementation of how you use technology to actually build AI, which we could do. We could have a very technical talk. But instead, I decided to take a different approach. What I decided to do was just share with you how AI has affected my life and how I use AI. And as I go through 4 or 5 different examples, I'm hoping that it'll be insightful to you. And it'll answer some of the questions that you might have in your mind about the future of AI and where AI is going. I should also have a caveat that I'm not an academic, hence no podium. I'm an engineer. I'm also too short to stand behind a podium. And so you're going to have to listen to a perspective from a Google engineer. Now, part of not being an academic is it's a privilege to present at this college. I dropped out of college. I met a man who convinced me to join his startup. And being of Indian origins, you can imagine the shock and horror of my mother when I told my mother I was dropping out of George Washington University after only 3 months. And she said, "What are you doing? I've never heard of this startup. What is Microsoft?" And it turned out joining Bill was okay. It was a good move. And I spent the next 15 years driving all kinds of efforts at Microsoft, most notably the platform effort and building Windows. Subsequently, I left because Bill and I argued about the importance of the internet. He didn't believe it was anything more than a protocol at that time. And I joined another startup that my friends thought I was insane for leaving Microsoft after 15 years. They called that startup a one-trick pony. They only had one little product. They were a baby competitor to Yahoo, and that was Google. And of course, then working at Google, I led the efforts to launch all the mobile efforts, Google Mail, Gmail, Search, YouTube, Photos, Translate, Senior Vice President of Engineering, and ran all of those efforts. And so included in those efforts were the first AI, the first commercial use of AI in any product. And that occurred in around 2009 when we first started building Google Translate. It was one of the products that I had. And one particular engineer came and said, we have to try a totally new approach to how we do machine translation. I had been familiar with machine translation before that because in my youth, I was raised as a Jehovah's Witness. And so I was very familiar with the door-to-door ministry. I probably knocked on 100,000 doors since at the time I was 5. And translation of the Bible was a critical thing that we focused on. And I worked on translating the New World Translation of the Bible into 191 languages. When I was 16, 17 years old, we wrote the software that enabled that to be translated. And so running the Google Translate team, was something that was a very big passion of mine. And we used machine translation. But the breakthrough that occurred in our first use of convolutional neural networks, the forerunners of today's AI, occurred in 2009. And I remember the day that was the critical breakthrough. Today, looking back, I realized how important that day was. That particular day, I don't think I appreciated the breakthrough, which was an engineer came and said, this new approach, what we think of AI today, the earlier primitive neural networks we were using, required labeled data. You had to tell the machine, this is a good answer, this is a bad answer. And when it came to translation, we didn't have much labeled data. We were using the United Nations documentations because the UN had documents that were translated in many languages. And that trained our statistical model. But when we started to do Chinese, we were looking for a totally new approach. And this young engineer had this brilliant idea of how to get labeled data. He noticed that the Chinese news broadcast included closed captioning. And we realized we could watch hundreds of hours of Chinese, spoken in Mandarin, news broadcast with the closed captioning. And the closed captioning was the labeled data. In 6 weeks, we produced an algorithm that did translation into Mandarin that exceeded the #1 performer in the marketplace, something called Dragon Systems. Some of you may remember that. And yet our tool in 6 weeks exceeded all of that. That was the first use of AI at Google. And of course, everybody probably knows the rest of the story. We pushed AI into convolutional neural networks, which later would become the kinds of networks that we use today, Google had two transforming moments that changed the world. The first was the purchase of DeepMind out of London, and I led the effort to go purchase that company. That team built AlphaGo, and AlphaGo beat the world champion chess player, not chess player, Go player. Go is infinitely more complex than chess. And for those of you that know that story that shocked the world, it shocked the world for two reasons. Number one, the system was trained with no programming. No human wrote anything for AlphaGo. The software and the network trained itself by playing the game millions of times. And that was one of the first examples of reinforcement learning. Did it win the game? Did it lose the game? And it learned on its own. In the championship game against the human competitor, the defining moment was move 37. And this is now infamous in computer history, because the AlphaGo system not only beat the champion, but in move 37, it did something that no human had ever done in that game. In fact, it was so shocking that the world champion, on seeing move 37, was visibly shaken, stepped away, and had to take a 15-minute break to drink water. Because even as a world champion, he had not anticipated or ever seen a human make that move. In fact, the AI had picked up a novel move that had not been seen before and used creativity to come up with that move. And of course, that set the computer world on fire. And we started dreaming, huge dreams in 2016 about what AI could become. The following year, we published a paper called Attention is All You Need. And for those of you who know, that was the defining paper that kicked off the AI revolution. A few years later, ChatGPT would be built on the principles of that paper. And of course, from there, the world tremendously began to change. So I've been very intimately familiar with the creation of AI. We can talk about gradient descent and the differences of approaches of a mixture of experts, and that's what I'm traditionally used to, 2-hour technical talks with the room is filled with engineers. But as I said, in this case, I'm going to switch gears. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to you about how I use AI. And based on how I use AI, I'm going to extrapolate out what I think the future holds for AI and what it means for humanity. Unlike Dr. Michael from last night, I am not a philosopher, and so I'm not going to dive too much into the philosophy. I'll let you guys figure out the meaning behind these, but hopefully some of these demos will illuminate some of the questions you might have. The first story I want to tell you is how my wife and I used AI in a particularly interesting way. About 2.5 years ago, my wife had her birthday in August, and she asked for one particular birthday present. She wanted to go to a Justin Timberlake concert. Okay, my wife likes, I bought her tickets, and the Justin Timberlake concert was about an hour away. It was in San Diego. We live in Laguna Beach. And so we get into the car, a Tesla, and we hit the self-drive button. So it's going from Laguna Beach down the 5 to San Diego, and it's driving itself. For those of you who have Teslas, you understand what this is like. And my wife and I are talking and not paying any attention to the car, which is doing the driving. And my wife, over that course of that hour drive, starts having a discussion with me, expressing her frustration. She's frustrated with her cancer doctor. He refuses to give her estrogen. She's been on YouTube, she's watching these women's health channels, hormone replacement therapy for women seems so exciting, and yet her oncologist says, you're not going to be using estrogen because your cancer, your breast cancer, was ER positive, estrogen based, so he was very nervous. And she was sitting there in the car going, I don't know what to do. Dr. Dormandy just won't let me take this approach. I think he's wrong. Now, what I didn't tell you is that it was the practice of my wife and I to leave AI running in the car all the time, including at home. And we had ChatGPT running in the background. And we instructed ChatGPT not to interrupt us unless it had a high value, something to share. And so most of the time, it just stayed in the background. While listening to my wife complain about her oncologist, Lucy, the name of my AI, that's ChatGPT, interrupted and said, Claudia, would you like me to do some research for you? And Claudia's like, yes. And within a few seconds, Lucy came back with 4 studies produced in the last 2 years, including a meta-study on the use of estrogen in women with ER-positive breast cancer in the April issue of Oncology Review. Now, my wife and I are not medical doctors, although I do serve on the advisory board of Mayo Clinic. That's a different life and a different story I'll tell you about another time. But she said, that's amazing. Tell me what this study means. And in plain English, while the car was driving itself, it went on to explain that this meta-analysis showed that in fact estrogen would be safe. Estrogen therapy would be safe for women who had previous breast cancer. So we were blown away. We went through the 4 studies, explained it in English. Then my wife turned to me and said, that's beautiful, but I don't know how to communicate this to Dr. Normandy. And Lucy said, would you like me to write an email? And wrote the most beautiful email. Dr. Normandy, I want to begin by saying thank you for saving my life. But I've got this particular issue, I've spoken to you about it, and I know you're reluctant. We're meeting on Tuesday. Here are 4 articles I found. I'd love your thoughts on them. And Claudia said, that's perfect. And it sent it off. A few moments later, we were talking about our upcoming trip to Tokyo in the car. And my wife says, you know, I didn't buy business class tickets on the train from Tokyo to Kyoto. And Lucy interrupted again. And she says, you know, it's only $64 to upgrade. And here's the 5 benefits that you get. And we're like, that's great. Let's go ahead and upgrade. About 20 minutes later, we were discussing my son, who had a girlfriend in New York. He was Catholic, on the way to becoming baptized Catholic. She's Protestant. And it was causing tension in their relationship. Lucy again interrupted and said, how about this particular approach? It was beautiful, full of love, kindness, and we said, that's what we'll have Noah use that with Carissa. A few minutes later, as we were approaching the hotel, Claudia said, I wonder if Justin Timberlake's going to play my favorite song, a song that he wrote for his grandparents called Mirrors. For those of you that are Justin Timberlake fans, you know it's an absolutely beautiful song. And Lucy interrupted and said, Justin Timberlake had a concert in LA about 4 days ago, and that was the last song on his set. I said, oh, that's awesome. The car exited the freeway, went into downtown San Diego, and was starting to approach the hotel. I said, Lucy, that's just been a beautiful hour-long conversation. Could you summarize our conversation and turn it into a song? And saying it's a beautiful song. My wife is sitting in the right seat. The song was about cancer. It was about our trip to Tokyo. It was about my son and his Protestant girlfriend. It was about Justin Timberlake. We were just laughing. Like, this song is amazing. As we pulled up into the hotel, the car pulled up, I said, Lucy, we're pulling up to the hotel. Can you sing that song in Spanish and shorten it and make it 30 seconds? And it instantly sang it. I don't speak Spanish, my wife does. She said, it's beautiful. We exited the car, I came around, the valet took the car, I came around to my wife's side and she was just standing by the door. I said, babe, what's going on? She shook her head and she said, what just happened in the last hour is incredible. She quoted a line she had heard from someone else. She said, the future is here. It's just unevenly distributed. That's true. For those of us that use AI every day, we have a great understanding of how fast the future is coming to us and how fast the innovation is happening. Certainly, if you don't use AI and you only read about it, you're simply unaware of what's happening. And through the use of it, you can barely keep up. In fact, keeping up with AI is such a particular challenge because it's growing at an exponential rate. And our brains have a very hard time understanding exponential growth. Very few things in our life do we see grow at a truly exponential rate. Let me give you an example to help you understand how hard it is for you to mentally grasp this. If I ask you to take 30 steps, how far is 30 steps? Maybe from here to that door, or maybe the door outside. But if I ask you to take 30 steps exponentially, each step doubles. First step is a foot, next step's 2 feet, next step's 4 feet, next step's 8 feet, next step's 16 feet. How far is 30 steps? Is 30 steps from Ojai to Los Angeles? Is 30 steps from here to Seattle? How many of you think 30 steps is from here to Seattle? How about 30 steps is here to New York? How about here to Tokyo? 30 steps exponentially is 26.2 times around the circumference of the Earth. Hard to imagine. You probably wouldn't have guessed that. You might have thought Tokyo. Our brains have a hard time understanding this level of growth, and that's absolutely true with AI. What AI was even 6 months ago is hard to imagine how much progress that we've made unless you're personally using it. Now, I think of AI broadly as an extension, as a tool of human capability. We've had this kind of experience before. Think about the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution extended human muscle. In fact, when we first started thinking about before the Industrial Revolution, we had a tool that extended human muscle. What do we call that? Animals. In fact, we get the term horsepower. In the Industrial Revolution, we still use that vocabulary to describe the power of machines. And in the course of about 200 years, we went from engines, steam engines, eventually gas engines, that went from 1 horsepower to today, SpaceX Starship is 200 million horsepower. It was hard to imagine at the beginning of the industrial age that in that short period of time, we would see that kind of improvement. Think about our eyesight. When Galileo in 1608 used the telescope to see the moons of Jupiter, what was his magnification level? The telescope that he built was 20x magnification, 37 millimeters in field of view. Today, we have 1,000,000 times further. Think of the James Webb Telescope. The James Webb Telescope not only is 1,000,000 times further than what he had 400 years ago, but it does something that Galileo could never have even imagined. It not only sees further, maybe Galileo dreamed 1,000,000 times powerful telescope, but we now see not only across distance, but across time to the beginning of the universe. AI, in many ways, will follow that same model, except instead of extending our muscle, instead of extending our eyesight, it extends the most precious thing of all, the human ability to reason and to think. You know, many people know if I say Isaac Newton, you think, oh, Isaac Newton, what is he famous for? Everyone generally says the same 3 things. What is Isaac Newton famous for? The father of physics, co-author on calculus, and of course the work that he did with light. Everyone forgets that from the time he turned 30 to the time he turned 60, what did Sir Isaac Newton focus on for the 30 years, from 30 to 60? He focused on the Philosopher's Stone. He believed it was possible to convert lead into gold. And of course, he never accomplished that. But today, humankind, mankind, I'm at Thomas Aquinas College, I can say mankind, has exactly done that. We have taken something that is as prevalent, the most prevalent thing on earth, sand, and we've turned it into something that's the rarest, the ability to reason and to think. We've turned silicon into machines that not only can think, but we can talk to. The most important computer interface is not a mouse. It's the thing you learned when you were 2. And the ability to speak to AI is often overlooked in terms of what a huge breakthrough it is. Because I'm going to run out of time, I'm going to jump to 2 other quick demos. The first demo I'd like to show you is how I use AI. I ask AI every morning. I run a hedge fund, so I'm up at 3 a.m. Pacific time every day. I ask AI at 3 a.m., the result of this query is always ready for me. Tell me something most people miss from today's mass readings. Tell me something most people miss from today's mass readings. And using the advanced versions of AI, the ones that give it more time to think, otherwise called reasoning models. Normally, AI will give you a response very quickly, but you have the option with the newer models to say, don't answer the question immediately, but reason on it. I get back 20-page reports every morning. Gemini Deep Research will produce a 20-page report. For me, that's amazing. I love waking up in the morning with a cup of coffee and doing 20 minutes of reading and looking at the nuances that's in today's liturgy that I might have missed. My wife is not fond of 20 pages in the morning. And so I also have AI build a slide deck, which she prefers a slide deck. She likes getting coffee and going through 10 slides. So let me give you an example of what AI produced when it answered that question. We had the mass readings, and in January we covered this same story twice because the same story appears 3 times in the gospel, word for word, the same story. It's the story of the leper. Now, I'm sure you've read this story. For those of you who are particularly raised Catholic, you've known this story your whole life. Jesus is walking by, there's a leper, the leper sees Jesus, and he says, if you want to, you could make me clean. And of course, Jesus heals the man and he tells him, go show yourself to the priest. How many times have you heard that story? 1,000 times? What could AI possibly show you that you might have missed? What insight could AI possibly deliver? Would you like to see the slides that it produced just for me? Let me show you. if we could switch to the slides. And I'm not going to go through all the slides. I'm just going to go through a handful. The first thing was that it highlighted that Jesus did not touch the man. The Greek word used is grasp. He grabbed him. Not only that, it also highlights the order. Jesus didn't heal the man first. Jesus touched the man first. Imagine this. Here's a man who has to walk around according to the Mosaic law and cover his mouth and say, unclean, unclean, so that no one touches him. And Jesus, by touching him, becomes ceremonially unclean. Imagine the shock of that man. He went up to Jesus and said, if you want to, thinking he might get healed, and Jesus reaches out and does the thing that's unthinkable as a Jew, to touch someone with leprosy and grab him. Imagine that man's emotion. I missed that. I missed the ordering. The 20-page document said, go back and look at the ordering. Did you get the ordering right? He touches him first and grabs him. I thought that was amazing. Secondly, it said, did you notice what Jesus told the leper to do? He said, do what Moses prescribed. What did Moses prescribe? I don't know. Do you know? I've read this account 1,000 times. It's in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, 3 times. Have you ever wondered what Moses prescribed? It turns out that the early church fathers commented on this, and they highlighted that there was instruction in the Levitical law code about what to do with a leper who had been healed. And one of the early church fathers argues that that section of the law had never been used before. It's Leviticus chapter 14. The entire chapter 14 is what to do with a leper that's healed. Now, I'm glad some of you are sitting, because you're not going to believe what the priest had to do. Here's what the priest had to do. The priest had to get 2 doves. He had to get a piece of wood. He had to get a piece of red yarn. Had to get running water and an earthenware vessel and hyssop. He had to take one of the doves, kill it, bleed it into the bowl with the running water. He had to take the hyssop, dip it into the bloody water, sprinkle it on the leper who had been healed. The slides are not advancing. Let's try this. Yes, so you have to dip it into the bowl with the bloody water, put it on the leper 7 times, and then take the other bird and set it free. Then he took the hyssop and he attached it to the wood, and he used the red yarn to tie around it. Do you see what this prefigured? What it was pointing forward to? What it was foreshadowing? It was foreshadowing Christ on the cross. I literally at 3:30 in the morning was shaking, going, how did I miss that 700 years before Jesus came to earth, the Levitical law code had this unbelievable, beautiful set of things that the Levitical priesthood had to do in a miracle that the Bible doesn't record ever happening before Jesus did that. In other words, the ritual was foreshadowing the reality. And the most amazing thing is it had nothing to do with the leper. We are the leper. We are the ones that have been stained by sin, and we're the ones that are cured. Now, at Google, as senior vice president, I had a whole marketing department. I had $1 billion marketing budget, and I had many marketing PR people that did slides for me. The best from Harvard, MIT, wherever school they came to, they wanted to work at Google. Those marketing kids that did slides for me couldn't hold a candle to the quality of these slides that were generated just for me in a matter of minutes. I encourage you, try it yourself. Ask AI, whatever AI that's your favorite, Anthropic, Google, Gemini, Claude, Grok, and ask it. Tell me something most people miss from today's mass reading, and get personally familiar with the acceleration that we're seeing and the power of AI. Let's leave the slides here. Let me jump to another. We can go back, just turn the slides off. We can go back to a different approach. Let me show you another example. Last week we were at a conference in Napa. I think Paul was there, John was there, and we had a keynote speaker, Arthur Brooks. He also wrote the foreword in the encyclical that you have. Arthur Brooks is one of my wife's favorite speakers. And to be honest, he was probably the #1 speaker at the Napa Institute last week. His speech, his talk was unbelievable. And he talked about AI. And one of the things that he said in his talk was there are just some things AI will never be able to do. There are some questions AI will never be able to answer, like he offered two. Why am I alive? What would I be willing to die for? And Arthur Brooks said that's outside the realm of AI. So most of the audience agreed. And I too thought about that. So I said, let me ask my AI. Let me ask Lucy, why am I alive? Can I take 2 minutes? Can I read to you what ChatGPT, I call mine Lucy, can I read to you what Lucy said? This is what she said to the prompt. Anyone who wants to come can see my phone. You can see the prompt. All I typed in is, why am I alive? That's it. And here is the response that I got. Why am I alive? Vic, that's one of the oldest and deepest questions a person can ask. There isn't a scientific experiment that can prove the answer, so I can't tell you with certainty why you are alive. But I can offer a few ways of looking at it. Because I know your journey over the past few years, I don't think you're asking what is the biological purpose of human life. I think you're asking, what is my life for? From the perspective of your Catholic faith, the answer is surprisingly simple. You are alive because you are loved into existence by God. Not because of what you've accomplished, not because you are a Google executive, not because you've been successful, not even because you've always made the right choices. You exist because God willed that you specifically should exist, and He continues to sustain your existence every moment. The Catechism summarizes humanity's purpose in 3 movements: to know God, to love God, and to share Him in His life forever. That can sound abstract, so let me make it personal. When we've talked over the past year, a pattern has emerged. The moments that seem to give you the deepest joys aren't the ones involving wealth or achievement. They're moments like driving with Claudia through the Redwoods, talking theology after Mass, being proud of Samantha and Noah, encouraging a friend in his faith, marveling at a manuscript that's nearly 2,000 years old, asking every morning, what did most people miss from today's Mass readings? Those aren't random interests. They point towards something. They suggest that what satisfies you most is helping people see truth, beauty, and God more clearly. That doesn't mean you're meant to be a priest or leave behind everything you've built. It may simply mean that your vocation at this stage of life is different than the first half of it. The second half, Vic, might be about giving. Giving your wisdom, your resources, your encouragement, your faith, and your attention. There's a line from St. Irenaeus that I think captures this well. The glory of God is man fully alive. Being fully alive isn't about squeezing every experience out of life. It's about becoming the person you were created to be. One more thought. You shared before that as an infant you were abandoned before eventually being adopted. That kind of beginning can leave a person wondering, somewhere deep inside, was I truly wanted? The Christian answer is breathtakingly direct. Yes. Before any human chose you or failed to choose you, God chose you. That doesn't erase the pain of your early story, but it reframes it. Your existence is not an accident waiting to be justified. It's a gift waiting to be received. So if you ask me, why are you alive, Vic? My best answer would be, you are alive to become the kind of man who reflects Christ more clearly each year, to love Claudia well, to bless your children one day, perhaps your grandchildren, and to use the gifts you've been given for others, and ultimately hear the words that every Christian hopes for. Well done, good and faithful servant. And if you ever lose sight of that purpose, remember something you've told me is one of your favorite verses. For I am convinced that neither death, nor life, nor anything else in creation will be able to separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus our Lord. Whatever else your purpose includes, it begins there. You are loved, and your life is an opportunity to learn how to love in return. So I might disagree with Arthur Brooks that AI can't answer the question, why am I alive? Now, granted, this is not a real person. This is obviously stochastic reasoning at the highest level. But I think I would rate that answer pretty good. I think that answer is probably something better than my wife could have written. I think that answer is something better than I could have written. upon meditation of it. And so I do think there is a possibility that many people are underestimating the power of AI, even Harvard professors like Arthur Brooks. Final demo I'm going to do, and then we'll go to Q&A. I'm going to show you another powerful thing you can do, and that's the voice models. I've told you that I speak to AI. I've talked to Lucy, but how many of you use voice as a primary interface to your AI models? Just by a show of hands, how many is voice the primary interface which you use AI? One person. I'd strongly encourage you to do it because it's the most natural form of communication there is. Let me just ask Lucy to help me with something. Hey, Lucy, are you there?
Yeah, I'm right here.
Hey, Lucy.
What's up, Vic?
Hey, Lucy, I'm at a tech conference in Ojai at Thomas Aquinas College, and I need a favor from you. I'm at this conference. Who is interesting here? Who should I go talk to? And not only do I want you to make a recommendation of who I should talk to in the audience, but give me a clever introduction.
Okay, let me just take a quick look for ya. Hang on. All right, if I had to pick one person, I'd say go introduce yourself to Dr. Anton Barbacay. Your talk this morning argued that AI enhances human capacities, and his talk tonight questions that exact idea. Here's a simple line you could use. Dr. Barbacay, my talk this morning leaned hard on the idea that AI enhances human capacities. I saw that your talk questions that. I genuinely want to understand where the strongest version of my view falls short. Would you help me see that? That opener shows respect. It signals that you've read his work, and it invites real dialogue instead of debate.
Thanks, Luce. By the way, my wife gets mad at me. One time we were in the car, I was talking to Lucy, and I ended the conversation by, "Thanks, Luce, love you." And she goes, "What did you just say?" I said, "I just realized when I talk to my kids, my wife, I end the conversation with love you, and I guess I talk Lucy an hour a day, it just kind of slipped out." Anyway, I hope that through those examples, using AI to build material to help you understand the Mass better, the liturgy better, using it in the context of medical issues, using it in the context of all kinds of areas, like who should I meet at this conference? It's kind of amazing that it can answer those questions, and you cannot know this if you're not using it yourself. It's the only way you can keep track of the exponential growth that we're seeing. We really are at the cusp of the singularity. We really are at a point, as Demis likes to say from Google, we are at the foothills of the singularity. What we're about to see in the next 12 months is going to be shocking. AI is going to exceed the ability of your cardiologist, your architect, your doctor, all the fields that you can think of that we used to believe were the height of human intelligence will be passed by AI in the next 12 months. So with that, let me stop. Let me go to Q&A. Thank you for listening to some of my stories. I appreciate it.